The Super Bowl is the culmination of the arduous, non-stop grind comprising an NFL season. From the slog of training camp and brutal summer heat, to the 4-month regular season, to dispatching multiple worthy playoff opponents in January when the weather turns helmet-shatteringly cold. All teams that win their conference championship and advance to the big game have clearly proven their chops. But they don't all enter it on equal footing. While many have to scratch and claw and struggle their way to the conference mountaintop, some find the escalator, seemingly encountering little to no difficulty. How has that manifested itself in the showdown for all the marbles? Well, here are the point differentials and win percentages of each of the Super Bowl era's first 118 of them from Week 1 up through their conference title game. But I figure some of these full season figures don't necessarily provide an accurate comparison to their other peers here, due to the idea that more recent performance would be more predictive of what we could expect to see in the Super Bowl. Two teams could have identical full season metrics, but if for instance one were far more dominant in September and October, whereas the other were far more dominant in December and January, what does that portend? Everyone knows about the full season exploits of the best, how the 72 Dolphins and 07 Patriots entered the Super Bowl having won all their games. You also got another 7 teams residing in the 90 to 95% range, having lost just one game. But there are some more under-the-radar squads lurking here, who, when isolating a more truncated part of their campaign leading into the Super Bowl as opposed to their entire season, shine more than you might have realized. Let's start with the 2016 Patriots, a team synonymous with a meme, but that also had quite the unique run of success entering Super Bowl 51. They'd outscored their opposition by 132 points across their prior 7 games. For context, nearly 30% of the rest of the league's teams have never at any point in their entire history produced such a dominant 7-game stretch. But if you dig deeper, there's something far more fascinating about what they managed to pull off. They never at any point faced any deficit in any of those 7 games. They prepared to take on the NFC champion Atlanta Falcons, having been 10 weeks removed from the last time their opponent had a higher number on the scoreboard at any point in a game. Some seasons, no team in the entire league plays 7 such games, let alone consecutively. Here's my favorite tidbit to underscore just how difficult it is to never trail in a game. The Super Bowl champion 2011 New York Giants won the Super Bowl, yet they trailed at some point in each and every one of their first 15 games. And did I mention that they wound up winning the Super Bowl? Those champs played precisely 1 game all regular season in which they never trailed, and 5 years later, a juggernaut formed that didn't just rattle off 7 such games consecutively, but did so leading into the Super Bowl. Outside the extreme needle threading of a scoreless tie, or a game's first point serving as a walk-off that breaks a scoreless tie, to never trail in a game means authoring the game's first score. Of course, there's plenty of work beyond that to ensure not relinquishing that lead, but that's obviously the first step. There are not 1, not 2, but 3 NFL teams who have never even had a 7-game streak scoring first, let alone all that's entailed beyond that. Best I can tell, there are only 2 other team seasons in the Super Bowl era that featured a similar streak, and those would be Dan Marino's '84 Dolphins and Peyton Manning's '05 Colts. And the 16 Pats streak can still be distinguished in that not only were none of the 7 games all that competitive, where perhaps New England's opponent, say, at least knotted up the score at some point deep in the contest, but in 6 of the 7 games, they were never even tied beyond the obligatory 0-0. In the lone exception in Denver, the Broncos merely tied the game at 3 in the first quarter before the Pats pulled ahead for good early in the second. So those were the heights at which the Patriots were flying and that Atlanta was forced to contend with. Bookmark that. We'll check back here. The next team soaring at similarly lofty heights entering the big game was the '96 Packers. There's an important backdrop to understand about those Packers. Under head coach Vince Lombardi, they won 5 championships in the 7 years spanning 1961 to 67. They then immediately wandered through the NFL abyss for a full quarter century, From 1968 through 92, they made the playoffs in a league-low 2 of those 25 seasons. They went from dining for years on nothing but the finest filet mignon and lobster tail to all of a sudden foraging for decades in the NFL's barren wilderness, seeking berries and coconuts. Led by the duo of head coach Mike Holmgren and quarterback Brett Favre, their fortunes started changing in '93 when they re-established themselves as a consistent playoff participant. Things reached a crescendo late in '96. In each of their 7 games leading into Super Bowl 31, they scored at least 24 points while allowing no more than 17. Not only is that the longest streak of all time, but in the 20 years prior, no team had a season with even 6 consecutive such wins. And in the 29 years and counting since, the NFL likewise never saw a team with even 6 consecutive such wins. With a margin of victory of at least 11 points in all of them, they also became the first team since 1970's AFL-NFL merger to win 7 straight games by that many points, and they did so despite a trio of 12-win opponents, including waxing the Broncos when they were 12-1. Cumulatively, they outscored their opposition by 155 points across those 7 games. Again, using as context the best 7-game stretch in the entire history of other teams, we see half the league's clubs have never replicated that which Green Bay had going on as they cruised into Super Sunday. Just 2 years earlier, we have the fascinating story of a team near and dear to my heart, the '94 Niners. On October 2nd, they welcomed to town the Philadelphia Eagles in an infamous game within Niners lore that represents the ultimate inflection point any team could ever experience. In his first career game, Philly running back Charlie Garner caps the first drive with a score, and in what has to be the ultimate omen of what's to come, on the Niners' first offensive play, the ball bounces off the hands of some guy named Jerry Rice and into the waiting arms of an Eagle. Garner cashes in on the very next snap, ripping off a beautiful touchdown run, his second by the time his career's just 6 minutes and 45 seconds old, the least amount of time anyone's ever needed to get multiple TDs under his belt. It also completely opens the floodgates to a comprehensive annihilation. The Eagles eventually take a 30-8 lead into the break, the only such halftime score we've ever seen through the league's first 105+ years. After the Eagles at a field goal, Young, who's been harassed and clobbered by the Eagles front all game, takes yet another hit. This prompts coach George Seifert to realize his completely decimated offensive line is thoroughly overmatched, and he waves the white flag, yanking Young mid-series. Down 25 points with only a few minutes left in the third quarter, they're buried in an obviously insurmountable hole. So after a day of enduring non-stop brutal punishment, he just wants to keep his superstar quarterback in one piece for the long season ahead. Not normally a hothead, Young is something less than thrilled about this. I'm no professional lip reader, but it appears he's hollering to Seifert something along the lines here of schmucking schmolshit. Please advise. In the fourth quarter, with the horse dead and fully buried, Eagles QB Randall Cunningham seizes the chance to twist the dagger just a little bit more to put the finishing touches on a scorigamic 40-8 beatdown. As of 2025, this game has given us not only the only halftime score we've ever seen, but also the only final score we've ever seen. It's also by far the worst loss the Niners had ever exposed their fans to in the 24-year history of Candlestick Park, with no other game even close, especially in recent years. I was a fan aged only 6 at the time, and seeing my beloved team play so poorly back then was so foreign to my eyes that in the aftermath I think I still said, "The hell did I just watch?" And yet, at the end of a column in which he justifiably scorches the Niners like the rest of the world has, the Oakland Tribune's Dave Newhouse closes with an about face and calls his shot. Even with their exasperated head coach tepid about his own team's ability to pick up the pieces, Newhouse insists they'll rebound. Immediately. And look how right he is. Thanks to being pulled while still intact during the Philly game, Young goes on to win MVP in the wake of perhaps the most efficient season that had ever been seen. For the next 15 weeks that lead up to Super Bowl 29, Young and the Niners lay waste to the rest of the NFL, winning every single game that they're interested in, mostly in blowout fashion. Their lone loss, and the only reason I can even use this metric for the y-axis since 0 can't be a denominator, comes in the regular season finale when they've already clinched the top playoff seed, mostly deploy backups, and lose by 1 score to a desperate Vikings squad playing with a division title on the line. And it proves to be a mere speed bump as the Niners still manage to generate a point differential of plus 231 from after that Philly meltdown up through the NFC title game. It's one of the most dominant 13-game stretches in NFL history, a number reached by only a couple teams in the subsequent decades. And if you'll humor me by pretending the game they didn't care about didn't exist, that'd be plus 238 across a 12-game stretch as they rampage into their Super Bowl clash with the San Diego Chargers. That's a number surpassed by only a few teams ever, including only the 07 Pats in the 30-plus seasons since. All sparked by their uniquely rare 40-8 kick in the ass. Talk about finding beauty among the ashes. We'll now turn the clock back 8 years, where we see that the 86 Giants scored 63 points more than they allowed in their intra-conference playoff games to punch their ticket to Super Bowl 21. And the team sitting atop this throne just so happened to shellac the Packers by 31 in their prior game to close the regular season. And the game before that, they clipped the Cards by 20. Sum that all up, and you get a plus 114 point differential. This too was the first post-merger instance of a team outscoring its opposition by that much across a quartet of games, despite the playoffs and its inherent high-level opposition constituting half of them. Last but not least, as a brief honorable mention, the 85 Bears. Though there's nothing sneaky about their overall bona fides here, and they're a frequent answer to the question of the greatest defense of all time with a unit that pitched back-to-back playoff shutouts entering Super Bowl 20, there's still something about Buddy Ryan's 46 defense worth shining a light on that I bet even their most ardent supporters are likely unaware. And that something is that from halftime of Week 1 up through the NFC Championship game, the 85 Bears played 9.5 games at Soldier Field. Across those 570 minutes of football, their defense surrendered a grand total of 5 touchdowns and 3 field goals. For those scoring at home, and in a climate where the average NFL half featured nearly 11 points scored per team, that's an average of 2.3 points allowed per half across a sample as big as 19 halves, with shutouts pitched in over 63% of them. Their worst half here is still better than the NFL's rate at large, and it's the lone half allowing even 2/3 the league average. This level of destruction is so far beyond not funny, it's back to funny again. As one would imagine, those Bears mauled the Patriots in the ensuing 20th Super Bowl. The 86 Giants had little trouble overpowering the Broncos in the following Super Bowl, winning the NFL's only 39-20 game through more than a century and counting. The 94 Niners would have faced about as much resistance in Super Bowl 29 playing against air as they did playing against the Chargers, and the 96 Packers easily managed to finally bring the Lombardi Trophy back home to Titletown. As for those 2016 Patriots, well, the team that entered Super Bowl 51 having played with a lead for almost all of their previous 7 games while never trailing by even a single point for even a single second in any of them, never led for even a single second against the Falcons, but they did trail for over 56 minutes. And not just trail by a little either, but sinking to a late third quarter deficit as massive as 25 points. Legitimately one of the most mind-boggling juxtapositions imaginable. I forget what happened after that though. Oh well. So while the full season resumes of conference champions are generally going to be quite impressive, it can still belie reality as to who the most indestructible teams entering Super Sunday have truly been. Thanks for watching Secret Base. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you want to get a peek at even more stuff and see your name included alongside all these other very smart and good-looking people, subscribe to Secret Base on Patreon.